Hello children, hope you are safe, healthy and happy at home. In the previous class, we had learned about writing diary entries. I hope you must have started writing your diaries and must have started recording your experiences, your emotions and your feelings. You must continue doing that. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep. Dear children, can you guess what am I going to teach you today? I'm sure many of you must have guessed it right. Poems. Right. Today I'm going to teach you poetry. Children, poems are one of the best tools for learning a language and also creating love for language. You must have studied in your primary classes the NCERT textbooks. And if you remember, in the NCERT textbooks, before the poetry section, it would have written, read and enjoy. That means the poems were meant for enjoying and it was for pleasure and it was for you to be happy. And that is the reason why right from the pre-primary classes, you start learning a language, especially if your teacher is teaching you English, they teach you rhymes. They begin by teaching rhymes and that is because you love singing and when you sing a poem or when you sing a rhyme, you learn them very fast. You might remember many of your rhymes which you had learned in pre-primary or some of the poems which your teacher might have sung to you. Many of the poems can be put into tunes for you to make it interesting. So once you sing the poem, you learn it very fast and also you remember it. So dear children, before moving ahead, let's try to understand what are the objectives of learning a poem. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. William Wordsworth. Let's now look at the objectives of poetry. When you learn a poem, what do you learn? You learn to appreciate the poem, to understand the thought and imagination contained in the poem, to appreciate the rhyme and rhythm and style of the poem, to train the emotions, feelings and imagination, to develop the aesthetic sense, to create love for English poetry. So we had now looked at what are the objectives of learning a poetry and what are the things you develop or what are the skills you develop as you learn many poems that are there in your syllabus. Dear children, it's not that you limit yourselves to the poem mentioned in your syllabus. I would recommend whenever you learn a particular poem and you understand the theme or the message conveyed in the poem, maybe you can find more poems related to those themes and develop your poetic or the aesthetic sense or the appreciation for poems, and maybe you will be able to develop in you also more of emotions, feelings and imagination, which in turn will help you also to write your own poems. Now today, while we are learning poems and the various methods and the various figures of speech and the rhyming words, I hope you will be able to write your own poems. You can begin with very simple poems, using rhyming words. So once we finish today's lesson, I'm sure you will develop the confidence that you too can write poems, you can appreciate poems, you can try to understand the feelings and emotions that the poet has tried to put in the poem using various strategies or techniques. Dear children, when a poet writes a poem or he puts his thoughts, emotions and feelings in the form of a poem, as I told you, he uses various techniques, or you can say tools, to make the poem more interesting and to make it understandable for you, so that you can comprehend the message, you can comprehend the theme, and you can also develop an interest in you for the theme that the author has tried to put forward before you in the form of a poem. So in class 9th this year, let me tell you, the CBSE has tried to increase the number of poems in your syllabus. This year you have 10 poems in your syllabus, all of which are of different style, different themes, and of different nature. Some are short, some are long, some are in the form of a ballad, some are in the form of, it has got a different style. Therefore, let's try to understand what are the figures of speech, or what are the poetic devices the poets use to make it more interesting. And in order to understand the poem well, we need to know these figures of speech and understand them. And while we are reading the poems at home, try to figure out the poetic devices used by the poet to make the poem more interesting for you to read. So now let's look at the figures of speech which are used by poets while writing poems and try to understand them. Children, though there are many figures of speech, but I have chosen only those figures of speech which you need to understand for classes 9th and also for class 10th, which have been used in the poetry section of your syllabus. So we'll be looking at some of the figures of speech which are often there in the poems, and you need to answer the questions sometimes based on the figures of speech. So the first figure of speech is simile. A simile is a comparison between two unlike things using the words like or as. When the poet compares two things in a poem or in a particular line or lines of the poem, when you see a comparison between two things and the poet has used like or as. For example, as white as snow, as wise as an owl, like a pearl in the ocean. So whenever you see any comparison using like or as, that figure of speech is known as simile. Next is metaphor. A metaphor is also a comparison between two unlike things or ideas, but it is without the use of like or as. For example, the world is a stage. Here, though the meaning is the world is like a stage. When we read this sentence, the world is a stage, what does it mean to us? That the world is like a stage, but like has not been written there. But still we understand that the world has been compared to a stage. So here the comparison is without the use of like or as. Therefore, this figure of speech is known as metaphor. Other examples are, she's a night owl. That means she's like a night owl. He was a lion in the battlefield, which means he fought like a lion in the battlefield, but like has not been written there. So children, metaphor is a comparison without the use of like or as. Next is alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of the beginning sounds of words in a line. It could also be words beginning with the same sounds. For example, the first one, she sells seashells on the seashore. So you can see the sound sh. She sells seashells on the seashore. So the sound sh and s have been repeated in the same line. So, the words which have the same sounds beginning with letters having the same sounds are known as alliteration. Most of the time, in order to make the poem more beautiful, the poets use this poetic device. For example, the second one, Nick needed new notebooks. So the sound N, Nick needed new notebooks. So you can see the sound, the letters beginning with N and the sound N has been repeated in the same line. The next one, Walter wondered where Winnie was. Again here, the words beginning with the letter W and the sound W. Walter wondered where Winnie was. So children, alliteration is the repetition of the words with the same sound or the words beginning with the same letters with the same sounds in a particular line. The next figure of speech is personification. Personification is giving human qualities to non-living things or ideas. For example, you have the habit of watching many cartoons. In many of the cartoons, the animals are given human qualities. Or in many of the poems, you might also have read in the previous classes, the animals or inhuman or inanimate things are given human qualities. Okay, they are made lively, right? For example, there is a poem Brook, right, where the river is personified because the river talks about its journey, the river gets angry, the river passes slowly, and in this way the river has been personified. The other examples here are the flowers nodded, okay, the snowflakes danced, so as if the snowflakes are human beings and they are dancing. The thunder grumbled, as if the thunder was a human being like you and me, and it grumbled and it got angry. The next figure of speech is onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a term for a word that sounds like what it is describing. For example, when in the lines of poem, you can feel the sounds with the words used by the poet. For example, buzz, whoosh, click, okay, the tapping sound, the tapping feet, so the clapping hands. For example, the words which create some sounds in your mind, that particular poetic device is known as onomatopoeia. Repetition. Children, when a particular word is repeated in the lines of a poem or maybe in a text also, when words are repeated in a line, it is known as repetition. For example, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. So here the word water has been repeated in a line. And the second one of the famous poems of Robert Frost, which I quoted in the beginning, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Here the word miles and sleep have been even before or to and go have been repeated. So, dear children, when in a particular line words, the same words are repeated again and again, this figure of speech is known as repetition. Next, refrain. Now, what is refrain? Now, we learned that when a particular word is repeated, it's called repetition. But refrain is a particular, in a particular line, when a particular line is repeated, it is known as refrain. For example, let me quote again one line from the poem Brook. For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. So this line has been repeated many times in the poem. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Children, refrain is used by the poets or writers to stress on the importance of a particular line, or maybe it could be the main theme of the poem. Here, for men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. Here, the mortality of human beings and the immortality of the brook has been discussed. So that is the main theme of the poem, and that is why this particular line has been repeated in the poem again and again. And in the same way, in the poem of Robert Frost, stopping by the woods on a snowy evening, where he talks about his choice between the nature and the other priorities in his life. Therefore, he says, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So, this particular line talks about the theme of the poem. So, a refrain is the figure of speech where the theme of the poem is stressed and the lines are repeated again and again. The next figure of speech is oxymoron. What is oxymoron? It's a figure of speech where two words have been used which have contradictory meaning. For example, two things which are totally different, opposite sides, but they are used together. You might observe this while you are reading some of the poems in your textbook. For example, small crowd. You might be surprised, what is this? Small means very less in number, and at the same time it has been used with crowd. Crowd means where there are large number of people. Little giant. Little giant. Giant is a huge personality, and little, we are saying little giant. So two opposite things. Old news. Old and new. Old news. Okay. So the words which have contradictory meanings, two words which are totally different in meaning, they are used together. So this particular device is known as oxymoron. And imagery. Children, this is very interesting figure of speech which the poet uses to make the poem more lively. You know, he uses lot of words which creates pictures in your minds. So imagery makes use of particular words that create a visual representation of ideas in our minds. The word imagery is associated with mental pictures. For example, when you read a particular poem, the words which the poet uses creates pictures in your minds, and you feel as though you are in that particular place. For a moment, you try to imagine yourself in a totally different world, imagining those pictures in your mind. For example, it was dark and dim in the forest. So immediately the picture of a forest at night comes to your mind, that you imagine what would happen when it is too dark in a forest. Okay. So the words dark and dim are visual images. Dark means immediately the darkness comes to your mind. Then one more example has been given here. The fresh and juicy orange is very cold and sweet. Juicy and sweet, when associated with oranges, have an effect on our sense of taste or gustatory sense. For example, the moment you read the word juicy and sweet, the picture of oranges come to your mind, the picture of orange juice that is there in your fridge might come to your mind. Okay, so you're able to imagine that. So it makes the poem more lively with lot of pictures in your mind. The next figure of speech which I have taken for you today is irony. Children, irony is a figure of speech in which words are used in such a way that their intended meaning is different from the actual meaning of the words. It's a difference between appearance and reality. Okay? For example, let me give you one simple example to make you understand what is irony. Right? Maybe one of your friends gives you a cookie made by his or her mother, and you taste the cookie, you didn't like it, but in front of your friend, you say, wow, what a tasty cookie. I have never had such cookies in my life. You did not like the cookie, right? So this praise is not from your heart. You're saying this just to please your friend. So that is the irony. Maybe the other friends who are there, who also have the same feeling, might think, what a guy he is. You know, though the cookies are not tasty, he is praising the cookies like anything. So that is the irony. So one more example here. Water, water everywhere, and all the boats did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. What is the irony here? Here, this is from the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is in which the ship gets stuck in the middle of the sea, and all the crew members of the ship, they are very thirsty, so they are surrounded by water. Water, water everywhere, everywhere there is water, but they could not drink a drop of water because they were surrounded by the sea water, which they could not drink. The saline water cannot be drunk. So, though they were surrounded with water, though there was water everywhere, the irony is they were surrounded with water, but they could not drink that water. So, that is the irony. Children, irony is something where whatever you are saying is not real. It is something different from reality. You have something else in your mind or in your heart, and you are saying something else. So dear children, I hope the figures of speech, at least the main figures of speech that is there in your syllabus, is clear to you. Of course, there are many more figures of speech which you will be learning in higher classes. But for 9th and 10th, if you understand and remember these poetic devices, it will be useful for you in answering the questions related to them. Today, let's learn the first poem from your textbook, prose text, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. That is why I began today's lesson by quoting one of the famous poets of Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, because in this poem also he is trying to make a choice between the lovely natural beauty which he would like to enjoy, and also the other responsibilities in his life. So the poem Road Not Taken is also somewhat similar to theme to this poem. Of course, Robert Frost is one of the best poets who has tried to put in his poems the life of human beings, the challenges, and also the opportunities which they have in their life. So now let's go to the poem. The poem will be on your screen. Please watch it very carefully, go through it, and then we will discuss it. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, let's look at some of the words from the poem and try to know what do they mean. Diverged. Diverged means separated. Undergrowth. Bushes and shrubs. Wanted wear means it has not been used and walked on frequently and needed repaired or wear, as we say. Trodden, walked. Sigh, it means to take a deep breath out of sorrow or regret or relief. We say a sigh of relief. So children, you just watched this poem on your screen by Robert Frost. Let's go stanza by stanza and try to understand the poem. The first stanza, let me tell you children, Robert Frost has put forth the ideas of the choices made by human beings in their life in a very beautiful manner in this poem. Though here he talks of roads, but roads here represents the various choices or the opportunities which we get in our life and the choices we need to make. Okay. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. Here yellow wood. Wood here means forest, and the season is of autumn, where the trees shed their leaf and the green leaves have become yellow. So the forest with trees with yellow leaves. So once when the poet was traveling, and he came across a yellow wood where he found two roads diverged, that means separated in two different directions. And since he was a single traveler, so he could not take both the roads at a time. So he stood there and tried to look at both the roads and till where it had bent in the undergrowth. Undergrowth means we had seen it is thick growth of bushes and shrubs. Okay. So in the forest we see that sometimes when people don't walk on that particular road for maybe for some time, so bushes and shrubs start growing, and before you walk you need to clear them. So he saw both the roads, and then what did he decide to do? It was for him to decide now which road he need to take. So he took the other road, right? And he thought it was better than the first one because it was grassy and wanted wear. So actually people keep walking through the forest, and though he had seen that people walk that road, but still it wanted grassy and it need to be made it maybe by cutting away the grasses and shrubs and making the road clear for people to walk. So he saw both the roads, and one road which was used by people often, and the other one which required or which was grassy and wanted wear. So he decided to take the less traveled one, right? Because there are people who would like to take challenges, who would like to go on adventures, right? And they don't want to do things which people often do, which is common or which many people do. They want to do something different. So he chose the other road. And in the next stanza, he says that though both that morning equally late, for him that particular morning, or maybe morning here refers to the a decision again he has to make between both the roads. So he found both the roads again the same. Here he's saying same because the leaves had fallen from the trees on both the roads, and since trodden here is walked, so since people had not walked, so on both the roads there were leaves lying. Okay, so both the roads seemed similar to the poet. So he thought of taking the less travelled one, and he said he will take the other road some other day. Though I doubted if I should ever come back. Though he had a doubt whether he would come back or not. Right? I'll be talking about this later once we finish this. Now in the last stanza, the poet says, I shall be telling this with a sigh. Children, what was the meaning of sigh? That means when you regret something, or when you take a deep breath, of relief or of regret. It could be sad feeling, it could be happy feeling. Now the poet here is regretting. It is the sigh of regret, that after ages and ages, somewhere after so many years, he is regretting his decision. Again, he is repeating the same lines. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Children, here, as I told you, the roads are symbolic. Here, roads represent the choices which we make in our life. Life gives us many opportunities, children, to make a lot of choices. For example, you need to make a choice of your subjects, you need to make a choice of your career, you need to make a choice of what you want to do in future, right? You need to choose between lot of things. Even at home, you have a chance to make choices between so many things. Therefore, the poet here is trying to tell us, or give us the message, that when we are making choices in our life, we should be very careful, and we should make choices, and it should not be in such a way that we regret it later on, right? And it is also there, children, through the poem we understand that we also cannot predict that whether the choice we are making is going to be good for us or whether it is going to be bad for us, right? We can't predict that. So we make choice, but we need to take proper care to make the choice so that we don't regret it later. So, and though we know that maybe sometimes the choice which we are making is going to be full of challenges, okay? And then when we start walking on a particular path, many other paths might open, many other roads might open, many other choices might be there before us, and we keep on moving and moving and moving ahead, and we never look back or try to come back, right? For example, here the poet chose the road less travelled by and opportunities open for him, and he never turned back. He could not come and take the other road. That is what he is regretting. So we don't know, maybe he tells this with a sigh, because maybe he might not have been successful in on the first road, or whatever choices he had made. Therefore, we need to be very careful while we are making choices in our life. Okay, so we know that maybe sometimes we will not be able to come back once we have made a choice. So it's really the way we make choices, the way we make use of the opportunities which are there in front of us. So dear children, let me tell you that this year there has been a slight change in the questions which you get from the poem. For example, till now you were getting a stanza from the poem for comprehension, and you used to get 4 questions and 4 marks, 1 marks each. But this year there is a change. You will get extract, and you have a choice in that question number 7. It can be an extract from the poem and an extract from your text. So it is a choice for you, and you can answer any one question. So again, it carries 4 marks, but this time you will get 2 questions, 2 marks each of 4 marks, right? It will be very short answers, and therefore you must be prepared for that. And then also the questions which carries 2 marks, 10 marks is there for 5 questions in question number 8, and there also you will get at least 2 questions from your poems. So you need to learn the poems accordingly to be able to answer those questions. Now let's look at one type of question. Maybe let's look at the first stanza and try to see what questions could be asked from them and try to answer them. Children, I have taken 4 questions from stanza 1. Maybe you can get any of these questions. As I told you, you are going to get 2 questions this year. So let's try to understand how to answer these questions. For example, what do the 2 roads symbolize? The 2 roads symbolize the choices that we make in our life. They talk about the opportunities which we get in our life and the choice which we make, right? So that would be the answer, and you can also write it in your own creative way, as I have been telling you in the previous classes also. Find a word from the extract which means the same as separated from one another. That word is diverged, right? Why could the poet not travel both the roads? Here the answer would be, the poet could not travel both the roads because he was a single traveler, and being a single traveler, he could not travel both the roads at a time, so he had to make a choice between any one of the 2 roads. And the last question is, which figure of speech has been used in the first stanza, or maybe sometimes they can ask you the above stanza when it is in your question paper. So if we see in the first stanza, it talks about 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. So here the figure of speech is metaphor, right? The roads have been compared to the opportunities or choices in life. Okay, and also there is imagery in the first 4 lines, also in the other parts, but here we are talking of the first 4 lines. The yellow wood, okay, the forest. So the moment you read the word the yellow wood, you know, the yellow leaves in the forest come to your mind. So there is imagery, there is metaphor, right? So you can also find out from the other lines of the poem from your textbook, and with a pencil you can write down, since now you know what are the figures of speech, so you can write down. So let me tell you children here that earlier you had only 1 marks question. Now since you have 2 questions of 2 marks, so maybe you have to write the answer in at least 30 to 40 words. That is why it is very important for you to understand the poem. So you have to read the poem again and again, try to understand the meanings of difficult words. With a pencil, write them down in your book and try to understand the theme of the poem, since now I have told you what is the theme and what the poet is trying to tell us, and what choices we make and how it makes a difference in our life. So you try to understand the theme so that you are able to answer the questions in your question paper very well. I hope you understood the poem well. So you read the poem again and also try to identify the figures of speech, and also you can do this for the other poems, maybe initially for the 4 or 5 poems. As I told you, you have 10 poems in your syllabus, so you can do it for at least 3 or 4 poems or 5 poems. You can try to read them, you can try to figure out the poetic devices and try to understand the poem, try to understand the beauty of the poem, appreciate it, and try to learn them in a better way. So dear children, hope today's lesson was useful to you. I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy at home. Thank you.